When Alain Delon died in August 2024, he left behind one of the largest personal fortunes in European entertainment history. His estate was valued at over 200 million euros, including luxury properties in France and Switzerland, a priceless art collection featuring works by Picasso and Monet, extensive business investments, and decades of film royalties that continued to generate millions annually. But there was something missing from his will that shocked the entire entertainment world. His three children, Anthony, Anushka, and Elaine were left with almost nothing. The reading of Elaine's will took place in a prestigious law office in Paris 3 days after his funeral. Anthony, Anushka, and Elaine sat in leather chairs across from the family lawyer, expecting to learn the details of how they would share their father's massive fortune. Instead, they heard something that left them speechless. According to the will, the vast majority of Elaine's 200 million euro estate would go to charitable foundations focused on animal welfare and supporting struggling actors. His children would each receive a token inheritance of 50,000 euros, less than 0.1% of his total wealth, along with a few personal items of sentimental value. "I sat there thinking there had been some mistake," Anushka later revealed in an interview. 50,000 euros from a $200 million fortune? It was like being slapped in the face by a dead man. But the most devastating part wasn't the money, it was the letter that accompanied the will. In his own handwriting, Elaine had left a personal message explaining his decision that was more brutal than any amount of disinheritance could have been. "To my children," the letter began, "you have spent your adult lives treating me not as a father, but as a bank account. You have shown me love only when you needed money and respect only when it served your purposes. I refuse to reward this behavior by leaving you wealth you have not earned and do not deserve." The letter went on to detail specific incidents and grievances that Elaine had apparently been carrying for decades. He accused Anthony of only calling when he needed financial help for his business ventures. He criticized Anushka for publicly criticizing his personal relationships while expecting continued financial support. He condemned Elaine for what he saw as a lack of ambition and an expectation that his father's wealth would support him indefinitely. But the most shocking revelation came from Elaine's final television interview, recorded just 3 months before his death. The interview, which wasn't broadcast until after his funeral, contained his most honest and devastating assessment of his relationship with his children. "People ask me about my legacy," Elaine said, looking directly into the camera with the same intensity that had made him famous decades earlier. "They assume I want to leave my children money, but what legacy am I creating if I teach them that love can be inherited along with wealth?" The interviewer, veteran journalist Bernard Pivot, pressed him about whether he worried his children would struggle financially without his inheritance. Elaine's response was immediate and uncompromising. "My children are adults. They have received the finest educations money can buy. They have had every advantage that wealth could provide, and they have had over 40 years to build their own lives and careers. If they cannot succeed on their own by now, then no amount of inherited money will help them." But it was what came next that truly shocked everyone who watched the interview. "The truth is," Elaine continued, "I realized years ago that my children see me as an ATM machine that happens to be shaped like their father. They call on my birthday, they visit at Christmas, they remember Father's Day, but only because they know that maintaining a relationship with me is necessary to maintain their access to my wealth."
Pivot asked if he thought this assessment was fair, given that parent-child relationships were naturally complicated. "Let me tell you what convinced me," Elaine replied, his voice growing cold. 3 years ago, I had a health scare. The doctors thought I might have had a heart attack. Do you know which of my children called to check on my health? None of them. But do you know which of them called to ask about updating their provisions in my will? All of them. The interview revealed that Elaine had conducted what he called experiments over the years to test his children's motivations. He would mention financial difficulties or investment losses during conversations to see if their concern was for his well-being or for their inheritance. He would pretend to consider major charitable donations to gauge their reactions. "Every test confirmed what I had suspected," he said sadly. "They love my money more than they love me." The most heartbreaking moment in the interview came when Pivot asked if Elaine regretted having children. "I regret not being a better father," Elaine answered after a long pause. "But I also regret that my children chose to be worse children than I deserved. I gave them everything except the one thing they needed most, the understanding that love cannot be purchased and respect must be earned." The interview also revealed the specific incident that had finally convinced Elaine to disinherit his children completely. In 2021, during his recovery from a stroke, Elaine had overheard a phone conversation between his children in which they discussed his medical condition not in terms of his suffering or recovery, but in terms of how his potential death might affect their inheritance plans. They had been calculating the tax implications of his death and discussing which of his properties they wanted to claim. "I was lying in a hospital bed fighting for my life," Elaine recalled, "and my children were in the hallway discussing my estate like I was already dead. That's when I knew that whatever relationship we had was purely transactional." From that moment, Elaine began the process of restructuring his will to minimize his children's inheritance. He consulted with lawyers, tax specialists, and charitable organizations to ensure that his wealth would go to causes he believed in rather than to children who, in his view, had failed to earn it. The decision wasn't made in anger, according to the interview, but out of a cold, practical assessment of his children's character and motivations. "I'm not punishing them," he explained. "I'm simply refusing to reward behavior that I find morally objectionable. If they want wealth, they should earn it themselves, the way I did." The revelation of Elaine's true feelings about his children sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry and sparked heated debates about family responsibility, inheritance rights, and the relationship between love and money. The children's public response was swift and defensive. They issued a joint statement claiming that their father had been influenced by manipulative advisors and that his accusations were unfair and hurtful. "Our father was a complicated man who struggled with personal relationships throughout his life. We loved him despite his flaws, and we are devastated that he chose to end our relationship with such cruelty." But legal experts noted that the comprehensive nature of Elaine's will and the detailed explanations he provided made it nearly impossible to challenge successfully. He had clearly been of sound mind when making these decisions, and he had documented his reasoning extensively.
The charitable organizations that inherited the bulk of Elaine's fortune found themselves in an awkward position, inheriting wealth that came with such a painful family story. Several declined to comment publicly, while others emphasized their commitment to using the money for the causes Elaine had supported. The Animal Welfare Foundation, that received the largest portion of his estate, nearly 100 million euros, issued a statement saying they would honor Elaine's memory by ensuring the money was used effectively to protect animals and support conservation efforts. The psychological impact on Elaine's children was profound and public. Anthony struggled with depression and was hospitalized briefly after the will reading. Anushka publicly criticized her father's decision, calling it the final act of a selfish man who confused money with love. Elaine Fabienne largely withdrew from public life, refusing to give interviews or comment on his father's decision. The legal challenge to the will was swift, but ultimately unsuccessful. The children hired some of France's most expensive inheritance lawyers, arguing that their father had been unduly influenced by advisors who wanted to control his fortune. They claimed that his assessment of their behavior was colored by depression and illness, and that his decision to disinherit them was not representative of his true feelings. The legal proceedings revealed even more damaging information about the family's relationships. Court documents included detailed financial records showing that over the past 20 years, Elaine had given his children a combined total of over 15 million euros in gifts, loans, and support payments. Most of these loans had never been repaid, and most of the gifts had been requested for specific purposes that often proved to be fabricated or exaggerated. The most damaging evidence came from Elaine's personal assistant, who testified that she had been instructed to keep detailed records of all interactions with his children, including the reasons for their calls and visits. The records painted a picture of children who contacted their father primarily when they needed money or when major holidays or birthdays made communication socially obligatory. In the final 5 years of Mr. Delon's life, the assistant testified, his children called him a total of 47 times. 39 of those calls were requests for financial assistance. 6 were obligatory holiday greetings. 2 were to inform him of social events they wanted him to attend, both of which involved potential networking opportunities for their own careers. The assistant's testimony also revealed that Elaine had attempted multiple times to have meaningful conversations with his children about topics other than money, but that these attempts were consistently cut short or redirected back to financial matters. In the final 5 years of Mr. Delon's life, she recalled, his children tried to talk about his health, his memories, his thoughts about life and death. But they seemed impatient with these conversations. They would quickly steer the discussion back to practical matters, usually involving his will or his estate planning. But perhaps the most telling revelation came from people who had known the family personally. Several longtime friends and colleagues came forward to support Elaine's assessment of his children's behavior. The testimony of family friends was particularly damaging to the children's case. Multiple witnesses described incidents where the children had been openly dismissive of their father's health concerns, while simultaneously pressing him for details about his financial planning. One particularly shocking incident occurred during a family dinner in 2022 when Elaine had mentioned feeling tired and experiencing chest pains. According to witnesses, instead of expressing concern for his health, Anthony had immediately suggested that it might be time to update some paperwork and had asked if his father's will was current. Another witness recalled Anushka making jokes about her father's age and mortality at a public event, including comments about waiting for her inheritance that were loud enough for other guests to hear. The children's lawyers argued that these incidents were taken out of context and that normal family financial discussions were being portrayed unfairly. They maintained that their clients loved their father despite his increasingly difficult personality in his final years. However, the court was ultimately convinced by the comprehensive nature of Alain's documentation and the consistency of witness testimony. The judge ruled that Alain had been mentally competent when making his will and that his reasons for disinheritance, while harsh, were legally valid. The court finds, the judgment read, that the deceased's assessment of his children's motivations may have been severe, but it was based on observable behavior patterns documented over many years. A parent's right to dispose of their property as they see fit is fundamental, and the deceased's reasoning, while painful for his children, does not constitute grounds for invalidating his clearly expressed wishes. "I watched those children for years," said veteran actress Brigitte Bardot, who had known the family for decades. "They never visited Alain unless they wanted something. They never called just to talk. When he was sick, they were more concerned about the lawyers than the doctors." Director Bertrand Blier, who had worked with Alain multiple times, was even more direct. "Alain was a generous father who gave his children everything. But generosity without gratitude breeds entitlement, and entitlement breeds contempt. His children took his love for granted because they knew his money was guaranteed." The story of Alain's disinheritance became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unconditional financial support and the importance of earning rather than inheriting respect and love. Legal experts noted that similar cases were becoming more common as wealthy parents grew concerned about raising entitled children who expected inheritance rather than working to deserve it. We're seeing more and more parents who are choosing to give their wealth to charity rather than to children who have shown little appreciation for the sacrifices their parents made to accumulate that wealth, explained inheritance lawyer Marie-Claire Dubois. The case also sparked broader discussions about family relationships in wealthy families and the challenges of raising children who understand the value of money and work despite having access to unlimited resources. Child psychologists pointed out that Alain's children's behavior was not uncommon among the offspring of very wealthy individuals, but that his response, complete disinheritance, was both unusual and potentially devastating for family relationships. "Money can poison family relationships in both directions," explained Dr. Philippe Brenot, a specialist in family psychology. "Children can become entitled and transactional, but parents can also become bitter and withholding. The tragedy is that both sides usually love each other underneath the financial complications, but they lose the ability to express that love in healthy ways." In the end, Elaine's decision to disinherit his children stands as one of the most dramatic examples of a parent choosing principle over family loyalty. Whether his assessment of his children's motivations was fair or harsh remains a matter of debate. What is certain is that his final interview revealed a man who felt profoundly disappointed by the people he had hoped would carry on his legacy, and who chose to ensure that his life's work would benefit causes he believed in, rather than children who, in his view, had failed to earn his respect. The $200 million fortune that could have set up generations of his family instead became a monument to his belief that love, respect, and legacy cannot be inherited. They must be earned. If this shocking story of family relationships and inheritance drama moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who needs to think about how money affects family relationships. And tell us in the comments, do you think parents have the right to disinherit children who don't meet their expectations? Because sometimes the most painful truths come from the people who love us most, even when that love is expressed through rejection.